Hello, all you amazing people. Thank you very much for joining me once again for Gawdy TV, as I've rebranded. I'm not locked down in lockdown anymore because A, we're not reading lockdown, and B, we're not in lockdown. So Gawdy TV, although I think the videos are still called Lockdown in Lockdown, which is incredibly confusing. But to me, in my head, we are Gawdy TV. We are reading The Fury 2, otherwise known as The Storm. This is part 3. Everyone is doing everything, and honestly, I can't be bothered to recap, because if you've got to this far in this series of videos, then either you're in the wrong place and you need to go back and start at the beginning, or you've been with me most of the way and you don't really need a recap. Hopefully, it's a confusing book, but basically, evil thing in London, the other, we call it the man in the storm, devouring everything. People who have the Fury, I say infested, I don't know if that's the right word, possessed by angels, they don't know what they are really, who I've kind of given them powers. There's definitely movement here towards a big fight to try and save the world, but I shall leave that for time to tell. I'm just going to march straight on. We are in a chapter called The Other. That's my phone. There is words there, I promise. Oh, there we go. The Other, Part 2. So the other chapters are all based in London, where this thing has just kind of exploded into the sky and is sucking everything up like a vortex. The Other, Part 2. If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. That's Rupert Brooke, the soldier. Harry. This is a new character. This is the chapter that got completely cut from all editions of the book, apart from this one. London, 9:14 a.m. Captain Harry Botham's stomach flipped, the way it always did on takeoff. But it had settled by the time he banked the chopper round and pulled it out of Portsmouth Naval Base. The Apache, I think it's Apache. The Apache's monstrous Rolls-Royce engine growled, the warmth of the blades settling into him like a heartbeat as the ground shrank and the sky opened up. "Coordinates locked," said Simon Marshall. The gunner was sitting in front and below him, but his voice was fed through Harry's helmet speakers. "North, we should be there in 20 minutes. Harry checked the heads-up display, then pushed the throttle, taking the bird up 1,000 feet and to 180 miles per hour. Up here, sunlight poured into the cockpit like liquid gold, his visor darkening automatically to cut out the glare. 2 blips appeared on his radar, moving fast, and a second later a pair of RAF jets screamed overhead. Their contrails were the only blemish against the blue, an absolutely flawless summer's day. God knew they didn't get many like this, not even in the middle of summer, and Harry had been sunning himself outside the barracks when he was called up. As much as he loved being airborne, he could have done with another couple of hours of R&R, especially as nobody had told him why the RAF's entire fleet was being mobilised. "It's the Chinese, I'm telling you," said Marshall, reading his mind. "They finally decided they want to rule the world." Harry snorted. "Don't be an idiot," he replied, his voice feeding back into his own ears and making him sound not quite real. "What then?" he said. "An exercise?" "They told us this wasn't an exercise," Harry replied. His commanding officer had made that very clear, but the man's hurried briefing hadn't provided any information other than the fact that something big was going down in London. Something very big. "Probably terrorists," he replied with a shrug. "Well, wait till they get a load of me," Marshall said, patting his control panel. Harry smiled. The Apache was fully loaded, a 30mm chain gun under the fuselage capable of pumping out 625 rounds per minute, and a sweet mix of Hellfires and Hydras mounted on the hardpoints. Whatever was waiting for them, it was about to get blown to kingdom come. So why was there still a tickle of discomfort in his stomach, one that had nothing to do with the motion of the helicopter? He'd flown on 2 tours in Afghanistan and hadn't once felt like this, not even when he'd been clipped by a ground-fired RPG out in Helmand and had to crash land. Back then, the adrenaline had stripped every shred of fear from his system, had turned him into a machine. This was different. He felt way too human, way too vulnerable. Maybe it was because he was flying over home ground, the fields and towns of England floating below like debris on a slow green river. Maybe it was because he was flying into London, the city he'd once lived in. Maybe. He gulped down more air, suddenly uncomfortable in his seat. All they'd been told for sure was that there'd been some kind of attack on the capital. The order to scramble had come from General Stevens himself, which was a good indication of how serious it was. That dude didn't get out of bed for anything less than a world war. "Identify and intercept the target," he'd said over the comm, and that was that. Their orders, 5 words they had to obey, even if it meant life and limb. Ours is not to reason why, he said, the only poem he'd ever committed to memory. They all had, everyone in his unit. Ours is but to do and die, Marshall finished. Hell yeah! Harry checked the coordinates, nudged the stick a little to bring the bird back on course. They were over Guildford, a minute or two off the M25. The Apache just ate up the miles. Whoa, said Marshall. What the? Harry squinted through the narrow window, past the sweeping colours of his HUD. Something had a hold of the horizon, a fist of black smoke. The chopper rocked in a bout of turbulence, and Harry had the sudden idea that the clenched, knuckled hand was shaking the world, trying to rip it free from its mounting. He glanced at their position, still a good 20 miles away from ground zero, surely too far away to get a visual. He felt his gut squirm again, his hand twitching, wanting to bring the bird around 180. He had to force himself to keep moving forwards. That thing is... it must be huge, Harry. Base, we have eyes on, he said, knowing that the command centre had an open line into the chopper. Looks like some kind of explosion. How should we proceed? There was a sharp hiss of static, then the XO's voice fed through. As ordered, Captain. Investigate and intercept. Maintain a perimeter. 5 miles. We don't know how dangerous this thing is. Roger, he said, slowing the Apache down and lifting her to 2,000 feet. Whatever was down there, he wanted to be as high above it as he could get without entering RAF airspace. Nothing would kill him half as fast as a mid-air collision with a jet. Do we go weapons hot? Another pause, then... Yes. Weapons hot. Harry felt his skin go cold and prickly. Any hope that this was an exercise had just been obliterated. There was no way in hell they'd be given weapons hot status above the biggest city in Europe unless this was real. The windscreen was gradually filling with smoke, so thick and so dark that it looked like a huge granite mountain sprouting from the city. No, it was more as though someone had hacked a section out of the sky. Harry's polarised visor compensated for the dimming light, and he found himself craning forward in his seat, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There's nothing there, Marshall said. His voice whispered into Harry's ear. Oh, Jesus. There's nothing there. Of course there's something there, Harry thought. There had to be, with all that smoke. Only it wasn't smoke, he realised as they closed in. It was things. It was a spiralling cloud of matter. There were buildings in there, crumbling into pieces as they churned upwards. He could make out glinting shapes that might have been cars and smaller, darker ones. Not people. They can't be people. That twitched and struggled as they rose. The tornado spun relentlessly, maybe 5 miles across, sucking everything towards... What was that? There was a shape in the chaos. Everything spiralled around it like filthy bathwater circling a drain, sparking off fingers of lightning that were dark instead of bright, which left huge black scars against Harry's retinas. He didn't blink. He didn't dare close his eyes for even a second, in case this thing, this impossible nightmare, came for him. He just stared at the figure in the centre of the storm, because that's what it was, a man. Huge, yes, and deformed, as though his body was a balloon pumped up almost beyond recognition, but still unmistakably human. And the worst thing was its mouth. Immense and gaping, breathing in everything, with an endless howl that could be heard above the chopper's engines. Harry was throwing up before he even knew it, ripping off his mouthpiece just in time, his breakfast hitting the reinforced glass screen that separated him from his gunner. The chopper banked hard, the ground looming up in the right-hand window. "Christ, Harry!" Marshall yelled, and Harry realised he'd dropped the stick. He grabbed it, levelled out, bringing the Apache to a standstill and wiping his free hand over his mouth. He spat acid, his whole body drenched in sweat and his stomach cramping hard. There was a rip of thunder as a jet flew by overhead, the hiss of 2 sidewinders being launched. The missiles hurtled into the morning night, impacted right in the middle of the storm. An explosion bubbled out of the chaos, the shockwave making the chopper bounce. But the fire didn't last, sucked into the man's vast, dark gullet and extinguished. If anything, it seemed to make the tornado churn faster, harder, more of the ground peeling away and carried up by the vortex. And the man still hung there, his eyes 2 pits of boiling pitch, his mouth sucking in everything it could. "Fire!" Harry screamed, feeling a creeping tickle of madness in the corner of his mind. He had to destroy this thing, not to save London, but because he understood that if he had to look at it for much longer, then his brain was going to short-circuit. "Fire, goddammit!" Marshall didn't hesitate, unleashing a chain gun. the chain gun. A deafening rattle filled the cabin, streaks of tracer fire cutting a path towards the man in the storm. The barrage tore through some of the spiralling debris before finding its target, but the 30mm rounds disappeared into the carnage. There was a soft hiss, the chopper rocking as 4 missiles blasted outwards. Harry counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, before they ignited in a ball of rippling gold. Once again the explosion was swallowed up, pulled into the man's cavernous mouth along with the constant stream of debris. Marshall tried again, emptying the Apache's payload and turning the sky to fire. "It's not working," the gunner said. But Harry wasn't listening. The smoke was clearing, and more of the world had been erased. It wasn't just black, the way things disappear in the dark. It was gone. It was utterly empty. Just looking at it made his head hurt, because there was no way he could comprehend what he was seeing. It just didn't make sense. "Harry, get us out of here," Marshall shouted. He turned around, his eyes wide and white. "Harry!" Something popped like a cannon blast, and the chopper lurched downwards. It took Harry a moment to realise that it was the pressure changing as the air was sucked into the storm. They were being pulled towards it, caught in the flow, the chopper's demented alarm ringing into his headset. Marshall was banging on the window that separated them, but Harry couldn't pull his gaze from the windscreen. The bird was tilting downwards, giving him a perfect view of the streets below. They were breaking up, dissolving like sand sculptures in the wind. Buildings and cars and people alike burst into powder, sucked up into the tornado. "Harry, please!" said Marshall. Harry felt the chopper buck. It turned slowly, the engines whining, but the force that was pulling them was too strong. It was like being in a boat heading for a waterfall. No, it was more like they were in a spaceship being wrenched towards a black hole. There was nothing they could do, he realised. It was over. "Ours is not to reason why," he said. The Apache shook so violently that his head smacked against the top of the cockpit. Metal groaned, then the rotors ripped free overhead, spinning off into the darkness. Marshall was shrieking, and Harry tore off his helmet, suddenly drowning in the howl of the storm and that same endless inward breath from the hanging man. "Ours is but to do and die," he went on louder now. "Ours is not to reason why, ours is but to do and die," again and again, like a chant, like a prayer, as the front of the chopper began to come apart, breaking into pieces like a kit model. Then Marshall, his arms and legs and head coming loose, hanging there against a backdrop of boiling black skies. Harry looked down, realising that he was no longer inside the helicopter. Pieces of it floated beside him, suspended in the turbulence, a mile above the vanishing ground. He'd dreamed of this as a child, night after night, of being able to fly. That memory blew out the fear, and even though he could see his own flesh begin to unravel, layers of pink, then red, then white trailing outwards, he found himself smiling. "Ours is not to reason why," he said through crumbling lips. Then his mind ruptured into white noise and black light, and everything that was Harry Botham was pulled into the abyss. Graham's the police officer that got pulled into all this at the beginning of the Fury. London, 9:24 a.m. The worst thing was the noise. It was deafening, literally. He couldn't hear the people screaming, couldn't hear the revving engines or the wailing car alarms or the crash of metal as it folded into metal at the intersections, not even the explosions. There was only the storm, an endless roar that made the streets tremble, as if the city was a living thing quaking in terror. It was so loud that Graham hadn't seen more than a handful of windows still intact on his way across town, glass ripped from frames by the immense, rolling sonic pulse that pounded the streets. It was doing the same to his skull, as though that sound was a solid, living thing seeking the right frequency to split open the bone and let his brain slop out onto the pavement. He pushed past a crowd of tourists fleeing in the opposite direction, then turned onto Millbank. For a second it appeared in the gap between the buildings, a vast churning mass of matter that curled and spiralled around a core of darkness. From here, 10 miles away, it looked halfway between the cloud from an atom bomb and a storm, the sky impossibly dark, as though a section of night had fallen loose and dropped onto London. But in the gaps between the debris, between the flotsam and jetsam of his city, he saw something worse than darkness. He saw the places where the world had been rubbed away. Something was happening up there, soft explosions detonating in the middle of the storm. There were jets in the sky, choppers too being pulled into the hole like toys in a stream. Graham wrenched his head forwards, focused on where he was going. It had taken him, how long? Nearly 4 hours to get from his house to Millbank. He'd had to walk. The city was clogged with people trying to escape, nobody going in the same direction. All the main roads were frozen solid by accidents. The trains and the tube were shut down, which meant everybody was on foot. He felt as if he had battled past each and every one of London's 8 million inhabitants just to get to Thames House. He'd headed over to Whitehall first, to the counter-terrorism unit, but Erica Pierce hadn't been lying. The place had been deserted. MI5 was the next logical destination, but he had the awful feeling that he'd get there to find its rooms empty too. They've all fled. And you should too, because it will eat you, that storm. It will devour you. And he knew that was the truth, knew that he should turn tail and run. He'd called David 3 hours ago, told him to go, to head south, get out of the country if he could. With any luck, he'd have reached the coast by now, could head over the channel into France. Or maybe he went the other way. Maybe he got caught up, carried towards the storm. Maybe now he's circling the pit, or lost inside it. And the thought of him pulled into nothingness, snuffed out like a flame, the very essence of him extinguished, made Graham want to die. He could go. Call him on the way, meet him in Calais and just survive. Just go, just go, just go. He pushed the words away, turning the corner to see the river dead ahead. Even that was agitated, vibrations herding the water into white-lipped eddies and whirlpools, spitting dirty fountains and filling the air with the stench of sewage. The noise was louder here, echoing off the buildings, back and forth over the embankment. It sounded like a vast turbine sucking every last scrap of air into its engine. And yet it sounded like something else too. It sounded like trumpets, like a million war horns being blown in the skies above his head. It was the sound of London being eaten alive. He ran the last 100 yards to Thames House, finding the main doors open and deserted. There was nobody in the lobby, just a snowstorm of papers on the marble floor. At least the lights were on. Luckily the building had its own power source, several in fact, because from what he could see, half of the city was dark. He ducked into the first elevator, using his counter-terrorism keycard to activate the control panel. If there was anybody left, they'd be in the emergency bunker, control centre, standard procedure for an attack. He counted down the seconds as the elevator descended, wondering how powerful the storm had to be for him to feel its voice so deep beneath the ground, in the rocking of the elevator, the vibrating whine of the metal cables. The door slid open to reveal the huge, open-plan room. At first he mistook the constant movement for people, but he soon realised it was just the monitors that lined every wall and sat on every desk, displaying images of the city and the storm. He wiped the sweat from his brow, wondering how the hell he was supposed to handle this alone, when a woman stepped into view. She looked up from a sheaf of documents, frowned, then broke into a huge smile. "Graham? Oh, Jesus, I thought nobody was coming." He recognised her as Sam Holloway, one of the MI5 codebreakers. She'd done some work for him over at the CT unit last year. "Oh, Sam, it's good to see you," he said, walking into the room. "Please tell me you're not here by yourself." "No, Habib Rahman's over in comms trying to get a feed on what's happening. That's it. The rest of them either jumped ship or are over in Downing Street trying to evac the PM in the cabinet. That's priority one." Yeah, save the idiots in government. Definitely a priority, thought Graham. "What's the current situation?" he asked, walking to the director's desk. On the monitor there, more of the city was being sucked into the throat of the storm. The Air Force have sent in an attack force, but she didn't need to finish. He'd seen it for himself. "Any idea what it is?" "No," Sam replied, "but it's big. Everything from Edgware in the north down to Fortune Green. It's gone." "Gone?" "Yeah, it's gone. It's just not there anymore." There was a tremor in her voice, nothing to do with the roar of the storm. "This footage is from a US Black Hawk, positioned 5 miles from ground zero." 5 miles, but the picture was sharp enough to make out the vast gulf that had opened up beneath the tornado. It looked bottomless, more than bottomless. Graham got the idea that if you were to step off the edge, you would simply cease to exist. "Any other eyes on?" he asked. Sam nodded, running her hands across the touchscreen monitor until the view changed. "This one's from a Sentinel," she said. The shot was higher, making the storm look more like a tornado than ever, a looping coil of shadow that towered over the city, maybe 3 miles wide now. Even as he watched, Graham saw a chunk of land snap free from the earth, rising slowly, almost gracefully, into the maelstrom, where it began to break apart. The entire room shook, dust raining down from the ceiling and several of the computer screens shutting off before rebooting. It was as though he was back in the Gulf, bunkered up inside a cave while enemy RPGs pounded his hideout. That island of land had to have been 500 metres across. How many people had been there? He asked himself as it crumbled, caught in the howling spiral of the vortex, pulled towards the mouth of the storm. How many more just died? Any theories? He coughed the words out. None, Sam said. No radioactive signature, no indication of a biological threat, but... He looked at her, at the way the colour drained from her face, and felt a million icy fingers run up his back. But what? Ground Zero, she started. The epicentre of the storm. Oh, I said Graham was the policeman. He's not. Graham's the counter-terrorist officer. Sorry, completely. Graham's dead. The policeman. What was his name? I completely forgot. He died. This is someone completely different. Sorry. Ignore me. But what? Ground Zero, she started. The epicentre of the storm. There was something there when all this started. A bomb? No. A man. A dead man. She chewed her bottom lip, loading another piece of footage onto her monitor. It showed a morgue table, one of the ones upstairs in this very building, he thought. Lying on it was the body of a man, pulled open by a coroner's tools to reveal the empty box of his torso. And yet even sitting here, watching it on a screen, it was obvious that there was some kind of life there, in the man's pale, quickening eyes, and in his endless, inwards breath. Oh, Jesus. It's the same noise, he realised. It's the same sound as the storm. He came in on Friday, from Scotland Yard. Why wasn't I told? Graham asked. It was stonewalled, no communication in or out. The plan was to get it to Northwood, get it secure, then bring people in. But they never made it. Something happened on the way. We only found out when it became visible. Graham wiped his mouth, staring at the screen, at the living corpse that lay there. That was the figure he had seen in the tornado, the shape that hung in the centre of the chaos. The man in the storm, he thought, the words appearing from nowhere. And suddenly the overwhelming unreality of it hit him like a punch to the gut, a high-pitched whine popping in his eardrums. He leant forward, hands on his knees, wondering if he was about to puke, swallowing the acid back down with noisy, gasping gulps. He straightened, cleared the mess of his throat, spoke in a grating whisper. So what do we know for sure? That it's expanding fast, said Sam. That's why this place is deserted. We're a good 10 miles from the centre of the attack. It's not an attack, Graham thought. It's something more than that. Something so much worse. But at the rate that thing's growing, we'll have to be out of here soon. Other than that, we don't know anything. We need satellites, Sam, he said. I'm attempting to task one now, but the only one close enough is an NSA bird, and the Yanks are being cagey. Do whatever you have to, he said, pushing himself to his feet. Hack it if you can. He walked around a bank of screens to see Habib at his desk. He didn't know him personally, but the guy was pretty famous for writing unbreakable ciphers for the army. Habib, anything from the general? He's been alerted to the attack, he replied, shrugging. Northwood's been evacuated, but he's given us full use of any tactical units, and he's happy to discuss other options. Other options? There were no options, not that Graham could see. They didn't even know what this thing was. Part of him wanted to believe it was a nuke, a big one. Yeah, it would be awful. Yeah, parts of the city would be destroyed, would be radioactive for decades, and hundreds of thousands would perish. But a nuke was still a nuke, a fission warhead, a neutron striking a concentrated mass of a uranium-235 and starting a chain reaction of energy release. He understood a nuke. It was one of the first things they'd taught him. The scenario was right at the top of the nightmare list. What if someone detonates an atomic weapon in a major British city? And they had procedures to deal with it. Hell, during the Olympics they'd done nothing but prepare for a strike like this. No, he could handle a nuke. This was different. Because it isn't science, he thought. Whatever that thing is, it doesn't obey the rules of the universe. It destroys them. And that's what was truly terrifying, because there were no instruction manuals dealing with this, no computer simulations, no emergency drills. This was unknowable. He pressed the heels of his palms into his eye sockets, wishing he was back in bed, that this really was a nightmare. How many times had he had dreams like this? The bad things dreams. Nothing more than stress or too much port and cheese before bed. Why couldn't he wake up? Sir, you need to take a look at this as well. He opened his eyes, a solar storm of flashes filling the room. Sam was standing next to her desk, both hands clamped in her short hair. On her screen was a bulletin report from District Command. He squinted, reading the message twice and still not quite believing it. "Another attack?" he said. "Where?" "On the coast," said Sam. She sat, typing instructions into the console. The images on screen disappeared to be replaced by a crude photograph. For a moment, Graham couldn't quite make out what he was looking at. A beach? An angry grey sky? There was something wrong with it that he couldn't put his finger on. "What is that?" he said. "It's a wave." He saw it even as she gave her answer, only it wasn't a wave. It wasn't the right shape. This huge mass of water was scrunched into a fist, as if a vast explosion had been set off beneath the ocean. It hung above the horizon, and Graham only realised the sheer scale of the image when he noticed a town there. Tower blocks and houses and cars and tiny specks of people dwarfed by the great, dappled shadow of the water. "Oh my God," he said, slumping into his chair. "When was this taken?" "Half an hour ago," Sam said. "In Norfolk, Yarmouth." "Half an hour," he said. "Why are we just finding out?" "It got logged by the local law enforcement, but everything's tied up with that," she said, nodding at Graham's screen where the storm still raged. "There's not enough of us here. I only just picked it up in the hourlies." Graham swore, once again feeling the urge to get up and run. "The city, it's a town really, it got wiped out. There's nothing left." "What caused it?" he asked, rubbing his eyes again. Sam shook her head. "We don't know. It's related to another attack last night in the same area. An explosion, at least we think it was an explosion, destroyed a town called Hemingway. Nothing there, nothing worth attacking anyway, but for some reason it was hit." "Meteor strike?" he said, then added wishful thinking. Radar station up in Holmont recorded no meteor activity. Nothing's come in from the skies. Which ruled out missile strikes too. That was one good thing. It meant that someone like Iran or North Korea hadn't decided to lob a bunch of nukes at them. He took a deep breath, trying to shut out the white noise of fear, trying to arrange his thoughts into neat, logical patterns. One thing at a time, establish a clear chain of events. "Is there any footage from the attack last night?" he asked. Sam fiddled with her touchscreen, loading up a video feed. "There's this," she said. "Came in just now with a report from local LE, Norfolk Constab." She pressed play and they sat and watched it together. It was a night shot, everything green. A bunch of SWAT officers were jogging over what looked like a sand dune, the sea a huge slab of slate in front of them, the darkest thing on screen. He could hear barked orders, the harsh, panting breaths of whoever was wearing the helmet cam. They reached the summit of the dune and began to descend towards... "Kids," he said, seeing the group on the beach. 2 girls and 2, maybe 3 boys from the look of it. The fear in their expressions obvious even in shades of black and green. What the hell do they want with children? There was a scream. The front row of police breaking into a run. They charged at the children, uttering howls of rage. The flesh of his arms rippled into goosebumps as the police charged, trampling over each other, looking more like animals than people. One of the children yelled something, a name perhaps. Schiller. "Did you catch that?" he asked. "It sounded like..." The screen flared, the light so bright that Graham had to screw his eyes shut. When he looked again, a moment later, the scene was in chaos. The camera was shaking wildly, everything a blur, but that didn't stop him seeing one of the cops jerked up into the air like a fish on a hook. The man, or woman, Graham couldn't be sure, thrashed and shrieked, then popped. Graham could think of no other way to describe it. The body just burst into specks of ash, which drifted down through the shimmering green light, looking like fish food dropped in a tank of water. Another of the cops was pulled apart by invisible fingers, then another, all while the man with the helmet cam sat on the beach, shaking his head. He howled again, lumbered to his feet, then turned his head towards the sea. It was only for an instant, before the picture lurched upwards, then fizzed into static. But it looked as if there was something on the beach, something where the kids had been standing, something burning. "Go back," he barked, hearing the panic in his own voice. "Go back and freeze it." Sam scanned back through the file, then played it forwards, frame by frame. Each expression caught with perfect clarity, the eyes of the cops shining madly. Their expressions were like nothing Graham had ever seen, so full of fury that they didn't look real. The scene lurched up, instant by instant, the beach coming into view, then a girl, then a white flare, burning like phosphorus. Sam paused it, and for a while they sat there and stared at the boy in the flames, two huge plumes of fire arcing up from his back, his eyes pockets of absolute brilliance that made Graham's retinas itch. They set him on fire? Sam asked. Graham shook his head. But what else could it be? The kid. He isn't human, he thought. Look at him, he's something else. Sam was edging the footage on, the burning boy visible for only a dozen more frames before the cameraman went airborne and the picture was lost. Get images of that over to the General, he said, feeling suddenly cold despite the heat of the room. Tell him to send a squad out to the coast. Try to find out what happened. Anything on the satellite? I can get it, Sam said, if you don't mind breaking the law. Do it, he replied. She brought up a new panel on her monitor, and he watched as she hacked the NSA satellite command code. It took all of 30 seconds. It's already in place, she said. They're watching us. Of course they were. The NSA would be monitoring London and the coast to make sure whatever was happening over here wasn't a threat to them over there. Nice of them to share. Sam loaded an image onto the screen. Fortunately, the skies were flawless today, not counting the storm, and the view of the coast was perfect. It had been decimated, nothing but rubble and ruins still glistening in the sun. Can we go back to the time of the attack? He asked. Sam shook her head. This is live-ish. Just got to hope we get lucky, she said. He leant forward, studying the images on screen, the quagmire that had once been roads and buildings and people. There was something else there. You make any sense of that? He asked, pointing. It looked like an island of land in the sea, and on it a ball of light, almost like a solar flare, too bright for the satellite cam to properly capture. Sam shrugged. Can that be real? Is it a data transfer glitch? From an NSA bird? No way. It's real, she said. Past the glare, Graham could make out 5 black dots, 5 people. There was no way of seeing who they were, but the shot was too wide, too far away. There was no way of seeing who they were, because the shot was too wide, too far away. But he had a hunch that they were the same kids as in the police video. After all, this was only a few miles away. Can we track them if they move? Yeah, but the moment I do, NSA will know we've taken control of it. The last thing we want right now is to piss off the Yanks. Do it, he said, jabbing at the screen, at the little dots there. Whatever happens, we need to maintain eyes on. Sam sighed, typing in codes until the image on screen shifted. On the other side of the room, a phone started to ring. He ignored it. It would be somebody from the States, somebody very, very angry. They're attempting to regain control, said Sam. I'll just fight them for as long as it takes, he said. I'll have the General put together a team. We need to bring them in alive. Yes, sir, Sam said. The phone stopped ringing, then began again, sounding somehow even louder and more irate than before. Graham tuned it out, staring at the screen on his desk. It still showed the burning boy, those plumes of flame stretching up from his back. They looked like wings, he thought, with another sweeping rush of vertigo. It was impossible, and yet the cataclysm that raged not 10 miles from where he sat was impossible too. He thought about the shape in the darkness, the man who hung in the storm. Wasn't there a likeness there between him and the burning boy, a similarity? There was no way it could be a coincidence. Whatever was happening in London and on the coast was connected. If they could just find those kids, they'd find answers. Next chapter. Are we doing for time? Yeah. Next chapter is called Morning. Morning. And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire, and he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot upon the earth, and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth, and when he had cried, several thunders uttered their voices. That's from the book of Revelation. There you go. Daisy, East Walsham, 9:27 a.m. Oh, Daisy. Hello, Daisy. There was so much violence, and she didn't know how to turn it off. It played out before her, inside the giant glaciers of her frozen world, each scene more horrific than the last. In one, she saw Cal beneath a car as the fire bit at his legs. She called to him, reached for him, but this place, wherever she was, had turned her into a ghost. It was okay, though, because he made it out, leaving a trail of charred corpses behind him. In another, she watched Schiller lift up the ocean and use it like a sledgehammer, pounding a town into oblivion. All those poor souls washed away. The scene was so insane that she wondered how it could be real, if maybe this was just an illusion in her head. But she could taste the salt water deep in her throat. She could hear the awful sound of the sea as it rose up and ate the land. It was real. It was all real. Schiller was growing more and more powerful, that was obvious, transforming from boy to angel with nothing more than a thought. But it was taking its toll. Daisy could see the fire in his chest, the place where his angel rested, and it was spreading, burning him from the inside out. It reminded her of the video they'd seen at school about cancer, the way it would, what was the word? Meta something. From organ to organ, using your veins and arteries like motorways to carry its poison around your body. The blue flame inside Schiller's chest had extended its fingers up into his throat, out towards his shoulders, tickling his ribs. She saw it as if she was looking at an X-ray. What would happen when the fire consumed him? There was someone else with Rilke. I need my glasses on. There was someone else with Rilke and Schiller now, not Marcus or Jade. Although she could still see them there too, she could sense their terror and their awe. There was another boy. His name was Howard, she realised, but even as she thought it, she heard a voice, faint, as though travelling a long way on a high wind. "Howie," it said. "My name's Howie. Where am I?" It was him, the new boy, speaking to her. Maybe he was here too, somewhere in this palace of ice and dreams. "You're," she started, wondering how best to explain it. "You were injured, I think." "My brother," the boy went on, and even in that soft whisper she could hear a heavy weight of sadness. He killed me. Am I in heaven?" "He didn't kill you. You're still alive. You're changing." "Into what?" "An angel," she said. "But not really an angel. It's just what we call them. I don't really know, Howie, but they're good. They're here to help us." "Is that what he is?" He meant Schiller, Daisy understood. "I don't want to be like that. I don't want to kill people. I don't want to burn." "You don't have to," she said. "It's not him doing that, it's her." Rilke. Poor, sad, angry, crazy Rilke. How could she have got it so wrong? "I just want to go home," said the boy. "Please let me go home." "You will," she said, trying to peer past the endless maze of ice cubes, trying to find him. "It won't be long. These things, they don't want to hurt us. They're just trying to help us. There's something we have to do." The man in the storm raged inside the ice, clearer than ever. He hung above the city, churning everything into nothing. His inkwell mouth was huge, that same awful, endless inward breath, sucking up buildings and cars and people, thousands and thousands of people. It was horrible. It was like the time at home when they'd found an ant's nest just outside their back door and her dad had brought out the hoover and sucked them all up. They had one of those fancy new ones with the transparent container instead of a bag, and she'd seen them, those ants hurled around and around with all the dust and filth, hundreds of them caught in the storm, until she'd pleaded with her dad to turn it off. She wondered if Howie could see it too, wherever he was, but the boy seemed to have gone. Maybe the man in the storm could be reasoned with too. After all, she had managed to get her dad to turn off the hoover. He just hadn't realised what he was doing, the harm he was causing. What if this thing was the same? If she could just speak to him, just tell him what he was doing, tell him that what he was doing was wrong, then maybe he'd stop. But how could she do that from in here? She floated through the ice like she was in a hall of mirrors, and all the while her own angel sat in her chest. She knew it was hatching in there, like somebody waking from a deep sleep. The angel had come from a place far away, she knew that much, somewhere even the fastest spaceship couldn't ever get to. It had been a long journey, and now the angel was waking up, remembering how to use its arms and legs the same way she sometimes needed to when she woke from a deep sleep. And once that happened, "You'll be just like Schiller," she thought. "You'll be made of cold fire, and you'll be able to flick your fingers and pull the world apart." And that scared her, because she did get angry sometimes. Once, years ago, when she was about 6 or 7, she hadn't been able to find her mum. It wasn't even like they were out anywhere. They were all inside the house, but Daisy had called and called and called because she'd painted a picture and she wanted to show it. Her mum hadn't answered, and the anger in Daisy's chest had been so sudden, so unexpected, that she'd torn the painting clean in two. Of course, her mum was just in the garden, putting something into the shed, and she'd come back in to find Daisy shivering with rage, the tears streaming down her face. She'd taped the picture back together and hung it over the fireplace, and everything had been okay. But Daisy had never forgotten that day, and the bolt of white-hot fury that had screamed up from her tummy. What if it happened again? What if the angel inside her saw it as a command? It wouldn't just be a picture of a lopsided lighthouse that was destroyed. But what if she needed her angel in order to talk to the man in the storm? Right now she was a ghost. She could see everything but touch nothing. And before that she'd been a girl, nearly a teenager, yes, but her voice was so quiet. People were always telling her she should speak up, especially her drama teacher, Mrs. Jackson. The man would never have heard her. When her angel hatched, though, when it woke up inside her heart, then her voice would be loud, loud enough to hear even over the howling thunder of the storm, as loud as Schiller's had been back in Thursville. She would tell the man to leave her world alone, to just go away. He would have to hear her. He would have to listen. "Howie," she called, wondering where the boy had gone. Had Schiller heard him, or Rilke? Were they keeping him quiet somehow? "If you can hear me, don't listen to Rilke. She's not a bad person, but she's got it all wrong. We're not here to hurt people, I know it. We're here to help them." No answer. Her voice was just too quiet. It wouldn't be long now. Her angel was nearly ready. Then she wouldn't be a ghost anymore. She wouldn't be a girl either. She'd be a voice, loud enough to blast away the storm. Read another couple. Cal, East Walsham, 9:29 a.m. Only now, in the quiet stillness of the church, did his body seem to remember what pain was. It started in his feet, pushing up into his abdomen. He could feel his heartbeat like a pulsing heat in his skin. But he was alive and safe. If anybody had followed him to the church, they'd be here by now, howling up and down the aisles. And he was warm. That was the main thing. He wasn't slipping into a pool of ice like Schiller and Daisy. That was good. It meant that whatever was inside him wasn't in a hurry to get out. He just wanted to drink something, lock the church door, and sleep for 100 years. But what to do about the vicar? The old man sat on the altar, muttering something beneath his breath and occasionally smiling nervously at Cal. He kept taking off his glasses and cleaning them on his jacket, again and again and again. If he wasn't careful, there would be no glass left in them. He put them on his nose, coughed, then spoke in a soft voice that carried the length of the church. Your friend needs help. You need help. Please, we can work through this together. Just tell me what's going on." You don't want to know, Cal thought. He flexed his jaw and a spasm shivered through the muscles like pins and needles. When he swallowed, it was as though he'd rolled up a sock and lodged it in the back of his throat. If he didn't get a drink soon, he felt like he'd turn into one of the stone statues that gazed benevolently down on him. "Look," the vicar said, "let me free and I'll tend to your injuries. There's a first aid kit in the rectory. I promise I'll do everything I can." "No," Cal croaked. "You don't understand. If you come near me, come near any of us, you'll try to kill us." "That's absurd," the vicar said. "I would never hurt a child. I would never hurt anybody. Please believe me, I'm a man of God." "I don't think God has anything to do with this," Cal said. It's older than that." He had no idea what he was saying. Can you tell me what you know about angels?" "What?" the vicar asked, cleaning his glasses. "Angels? Why?" "Just humour me," Cal said. "Angels." The man cleared the phlegm from his throat, a noise that might have been a laugh. Then he must have seen the look on Cal's face because his brow creased and he glanced at the floor. "Angels, well, I don't know what you want to know. In the Bible, they're spiritual beings. They are the messengers of God. In fact, that's what the word means. Messenger. It's Greek originally. He shrugged, the coil of rope rising, then slapping on the floor. "Is that the sort of thing you want to know?" Cal had no idea what he wanted to know. No, he struggled to think of the right question. Can they, possess people? Like demons? Can they come to Earth? How insane did that sound? The vicar was shaking his head. "Look, son," Cal, said Cal. "Cal, look, I'm not sure what it is you want to know. There was a crunch of gravel from outside, then the squeal of the door. Brick pushed into the church, carrying a glass of water in one hand and a loaf of bread in the other. He looked ashen, each freckle picked out like a pen mark against his pale skin, and when he held out the glass, his hand was shaking, so much that most of the water had sloshed out over his arm. Cal took a sip that burned down like acid. It was cool in his stomach, and he instantly felt better. "I thought I told you not to speak," Brick said, looking at the vicar. You told me not to try and escape," the man replied. Cal took another sip, bigger this time, before adding, It's okay, Brick. I asked him a question about angels. Brick hissed through his nose, crashing down on the back pew next to Adam. He handed the boy a fistful of bread, and Adam tucked into it like a starving dog. Angels, snorted Brick, spitting out crumbs. I'm telling you, that's bollocks. Oh, it doesn't hurt to ask, does it? Cal said, the anger making everything hurt twice as much. We're here, we might as well bloody well ask. He turned back to the vicar, waiting for the man to continue. If you tell me why you want to know about them, I may be able to give you a better answer. Because, Cal started hesitating, wondering if saying it aloud in a church might make it real in a way it hadn't been before. In front of him, Brick tore off another chunk of bread with his teeth, shaking his head. Cal finished. Because I think we're possessed by them. The vicar didn't reply, just swallowed noisily and started eyeballing the church door. His thoughts may as well have been broadcast over his head. They're crazy, they're on drugs, I just need to loosen the rope and make a run for it, if I could just get to the street. Reverend, whatever, Cal started. Doug, said Brick. His name's Doug. Doug, I know how insane this sounds. If we could prove it to you, we would. He cocked his head, an idea floundering inside the sea of pain that was his thoughts. Wait, do you have a camcorder? It didn't take long to find it inside the rectory. Brick returning after 5 minutes with a small flip cam. He crashed back into the pew, fiddling with the camera, snapping open the viewfinder. Please be careful with that, said Doug. It's Margaret's. She'd be very upset if it was damaged. It'll be fine. We'll be careful, said Cal. I need you to make sure that rope is secure, okay? It needs to be tight. Knot it again, just to be sure. The vicar did as he was told, then tugged his arm twice. It looked safe enough, but right now he was just an old fat guy. In a moment or two, when they crossed the line, he'd be something else, a creature of ancient, instinctive rage. Do it, said Cal. You do it, Brick replied. No way, I'm going over there. Look, said Doug, his voice an octave higher than it had been. Whatever you're thinking of doing to me, don't. Brick, just do it. The older boy pulled a face that made Cal want to kill him there and then. He looked as if he was going to try and hand the camcorder to Adam, then he pushed himself to his feet and slid out into the aisle. He hovered for a moment, unsure, cast one glowering look back at Cal, then hesitantly made his way towards the altar. There was a soft chime as he started to record. Please, just stop there, Doug whined, starting to pick at the knot with his free hand. Leave it, Cal said. We're not going to hurt you, I promise. Brick took another short, shuffling step, and another, closing the gap between him and the vicar. How far was it now? 25 metres, maybe? Cal couldn't be sure, but it wouldn't be. The vicar uttered a nasal whine, which curled up at the end into a snort. Even from the other end of the church, Cal could see the man's eyes grow dark, his face slack. I shouldn't have snorted. As though the flesh was slowly sliding off the bone. His body lurched, bumping him down onto the next step, his arms gouging at the carpet, at the stone as though he was having a fit. Brick paused, and Cal could almost see the waves of fear pulsing from him, filling the building with a sour, unpleasant smell. Go on, he said, you're not close enough. Brick muttered something that Cal couldn't hear, then stepped over the invisible line of the fury. Doug rocketed to his feet, a brittle scream grating from the black chasm of his mouth. He charged at Brick, making it all of 3 feet before the rope grew taut, locking him in place. Momentum caused his legs to fly up, his body thudding to the stone. He didn't care, thrashing, howling. That's enough, Brick, Cal said. Brick staggered back, almost tripping on his own feet. And just like that, he was back over the line, and the vicar was just a vicar again, a bundle of black cloth in the aisle, panting for breath and spitting blood. It took him several minutes to remember where he was, wheezing his way onto the lowest step of the altar, wiping the sheen of sweat from his bald head. He clutched his wrist, slick with blood, his cloudy eyes searching the church until they landed on Cal. What did you do to me? Show him, said Cal. Brick flicked the camcorder closed and bowled it down the aisle. The little hunk of plastic skidded over the uneven stone, thudding into the wooden rail that Doug was tied to. He no longer seemed concerned about his camera. He didn't seem too concerned about anything anymore, as though the fury had picked him up and shaken out anything that ever mattered, leaving him hollow. Watch it, said Cal. Another silent age passed, then Doug reached down and picked up the camcorder. There were more quiet beeps. Then Cal heard his own voice. "Go on, you're not close enough," followed by the unmistakable soundtrack of the Fury. Even hearing it like this made his skin crawl. The vicar's eyes were like golf balls, huge and white, as he watched himself on the tiny screen. What was it like to see yourself like that? To know that for a short while you were not you. You were something else, something terrible. The man watched it again, then gently folded the screen into the camera and laid it by his feet. "My God," he whispered, suddenly a child, as if Cal was the priest. "What happened to me?" "We did," Cal said. "Now please, tell us what you know." I think we've got time for one more. Brick, East Walsham, 9:52 a.m. I think there's a lot of biblical lore in here, some of which I probably made up. Angels are agents of God, more than men. They are messengers, mainly, bringers of revelation, like when Gabriel came to Mary in the Visitation, for instance. But they are warriors too. Brick stared at his feet as the vicar spoke, trying not to listen. Nothing this man said could have anything to do with what was happening. There was no way. He was talking about the Bible, a book written hundreds of years ago by guys who had nothing better to do. This was something else, something different. And yet there were words that the vicar used, words that seemed to hit home. Warriors, Brick thought, listening to the priest. Isn't that what Daisy said, that we were here to fight? What do you mean, warriors? He asked. Aren't angels like goody-goody cherubs with fat faces and halos and stuff? Well, no, the vicar said with a shake of his head. He was still pale and trembling, and in the heavy shadows of the far end of the church he looked like a ghost. Maybe now, perhaps, on Christmas cards, but originally they were more like an army, or guardians is maybe a better word. They're usually depicted with flaming swords. Some stand by God's throne. Like an imperial guard or something, said Cal from the back wall. Brick could hear the exhaustion in the boy's voice, wondered how long either of them would stay awake. It was just so still in here, like time had decided to cut them a break and stop a while. Adam was already curled up on the bench like a dog, eyes scrunched shut. You know, like with the Emperor out of Star Wars. I'm not sure about that comparison, Doug said, but yes, I suppose so. As for the others, they were mainly tasked with carrying messages to mankind. They're not just in the Bible, you know, they're found in almost every religion across the world. So, what are they made of? Cal asked. I don't understand why you think angels are responsible for this, for whatever is happening, Doug replied. It has to be a chemical thing, a reaction of some kind, a disease maybe. Trust me, said Cal. You haven't seen what we've seen. Go on. What are they made of? The priest shuffled uncomfortably, cleaning his glasses once again. This time he didn't put them back on. He just held them in his hands and examined them, as if the answers were written there. They are ethereal, I know that much. They are spirits. Have you heard the phrase, how many angels can you fit on the head of a pin? The answer is an infinite number, because they're not creatures of this world. Scholastic theologians teach us that they are able to move between places instantaneously, which allows them to travel back and forth between here and heaven. Because of this, they are often shown as being crafted from fire. At this, Brick peered over his shoulder and met Cal's eyes. He felt the sudden rush and shiver of goosebumps on his arms, folding them across his chest as if to hide them. Brick faced forward again, feeling a blush blossom over his cheeks and wondering why. So, no robes and little harps then, he said. Doug pushed his glasses back on and blinked, seemingly unsure if the question was serious or not. But there must be something in the Bible that says what they do and how they speak to people, yeah? Cal asked. Do they just show up and put the kettle on? No, usually they're more of an internal spirit, I suppose. They speak from within you without showing themselves. Convenient, grunted Brick. Don't you think he's on to something, Brick? Cal asked. Made of fire, living inside you, warriors. Any of that ring a bell? He didn't reply, just sat and chewed on his simmering anger. What did you mean by guardians? Asked Cal. They watch over us. Many people believe that. You must have heard the term guardian angel, yes? Duh. But do you get bad angels too? Brick asked, thinking of what he'd just seen on the TV, the man in the storm. Already the image was ebbing from his head, just a big black mark on his vision, as though his retinas had been scraped away. Better that than to see it again, though, the beast with its cloak of storm and its endless inward breath. He shuddered so violently that the bench rattled. Bad ones, yes. According to the Bible, Lucifer was once an angel, an archangel, really. Archangel, really. He believed that he could be more powerful than God and attempted to lead a rebellion, I guess, with his army of angels. Because of his sin of pride, God cast him down into the lake of fire, hell, along with his supporters. This is part of the scripture that I personally have difficulty with. It's always tempting to believe that human evil can be blamed on the devil, and yes, there are occasions when this is the case, but I think evil is also part of who we are. We have only ourselves to blame for the bad things of the world. At one time, Brick would have believed that, but not now, not with everything he'd seen. The man in the storm, that wasn't human. It was the very opposite of human, the very opposite of all life. But it wasn't the devil either, not the one out of the Bible. It was something else, something that roamed between worlds long before anyone had even uttered the word God. Brick could feel the truth of that in his guts, in the huge groaning weight of breaking time and space that he could almost hear in the immense quiet of the church. It was impossible to explain, but it was there nonetheless. This isn't getting us anywhere, he said, just so there was noise. Yeah, I know, Cal replied, I know. Look, Doug, some of the stuff in the Bible, though, is probably based on real things, right? No offence or anything, mate. I mean, I remember hearing that the Great Flood, the one with Noah and everything, might have been because of some mass tidal wave or something. Yes, Doug said. Doug? Doug. Yes, Doug said. There are, of course, relativist theories. In fact, I studied science in the Bible back during my curacy in Oxford. You're talking about the Black Sea Deluge theory, about 5,600 BC. Water from the Mediterranean Sea breached a sill in the Bosphorus Strait, I think. It would have caused a terrible flood. There are other examples too. The story of Moses in the Red Sea. There are conditions where a strong wind could actually part the waters of a river. It's called a wind set down. It's happened other times too in the Nile Delta. It's quite astonishing. So what are you saying, Brick asked? That science does all the work, then God just takes all the credit? The vicar laughed, shaking his head. I'm saying that many years ago we didn't know all that we know. A volcano, say, was an angry beast beneath the ground, or a hurricane was the gods battling in the heavens. Humans need to know the truth of things, even if that truth is fiction. It's in our nature to try to understand our lives. If science cannot explain something, then we invent our own science to explain it. And that science is usually called religion. So religion isn't real then, Brick said. Stupid thing for a vicar to say. No, you misunderstand me. Religion is about faith, and faith is a very different kind of knowledge. God is a scientific fact, and there is a science that explains the nature of God. Of course there is, but we do not know what that science is yet. Perhaps one day we will understand it, the same way that we now understand the science of gravity, of lightning, of some quantum particle behaviours. Perhaps one day we will know the scientific truth about God and our creation. Then science and religion will be one and the same. Brick hissed a laugh through his nose, although there was something in the vicar's words that made sense. You're saying that weird things happened a long time ago, said Cal. And people saw these things and blamed them on God. They told their kids, and those kids told their kids, and then eventually somebody was writing a book of the Bible, and they remembered this thing that they were told about the sea parting, or a big flood, or whatever, and that's how the Bible got written. The priest ran a hand across his head and nodded. Well, partly. Some miracles are God's, without a doubt, but perhaps not all. Everything is science. It has to be, but just because it is science that we do not understand yet, doesn't make it false. So, angels, Cal went on, and Brick realised he was talking to him. Maybe this has happened before, like thousands of years ago. Maybe people got possessed by whatever this is inside us, only they didn't know what they were. They just saw these things made out of fire, with wings, creatures that could destroy a whole town with a single word. They saw them and they called them angels, God's messengers, and they told their kids and so on, and eventually it just became part of religion. That makes sense, doesn't it? It did, but Brick didn't say anything. And the thing in London, the man in the store, maybe he's been here before. Maybe people saw him and thought he was just like us, like the angels, I mean, but a bad version. They might have just made up a story about how he was cast down and wanted to take his revenge. It could all have happened before, Brick. So what, Cal? Said Brick, turning around. Cal was hunched against the wall, wrapped up in his own arms. He looked small and weak, but his eyes were fierce. So it means they fought him before, the angels, Cal said. It means they stopped him doing whatever it is he's here to do. It means they won. How do you know that? Because we wouldn't be here otherwise, would we? That thing wants to eat everything. It's like a black hole. It won't stop until we destroy it. Yeah? Brick had to swallow a sour lump of bile that rose from the churning pit of his stomach. The image of the man in the storm appeared before him, seeming to fill the church with darkness. Trying to fight that would be like trying to stop a train with a toothpick. They'd be torn apart, pulled into that raging mouth along with everything else. And then what? There would be no afterlife, no heaven or hell, not in there. There was nothing but an end of things. How do we do that, Cal? We wait, the other boy said, until they hatch. And that thought was equally terrifying, the idea that there was something in his chest. No, deeper than that, in his soul, that was waiting for the right moment to burst through in a fist of fire, to take control of his body. The idea of it made him want to scream, and he pushed himself to his feet, out into the aisle, pacing with his hands clenched in his hair. He went back and forth, wishing he could cut a trench in the stone with his feet, bury himself there forever, with the skeletons beneath the church. Only when he stepped too close to the vicar, when he heard the man's breaths curl up into the unbearable whine of the fury, did he force himself to sit down again. But why do people hate us? Brick asked eventually. That's the bit I really don't understand. If we're here to fight that thing, then surely people would be on our side. They'd help us, not try to kill us. I don't know, said Cal. Doug, do you remember anything about what just happened when we were filming? The vicar went 2 shades paler and shook his head. It's as if that part of my memory, that my life, it just doesn't exist, he said. Well, 1 minute I was talking to you, then I black out, then everything's back to normal. Only it's not, because I tried to kill you. He wiped a hand across his face, and Brick realised the old man was crying. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. Have you ever hated someone so much you lose your mind over it? Brick said, the words out of his mouth before he even knew they were coming. Hated them so much your whole vision just burns white and it's like you're somebody else. Nobody answered. He shuffled, uncomfortable to be sharing so much. I have. So many times. I used to get so angry. Used to, said Cal with more than a hint of sarcasm. Brick felt it now, even as he talked about it, as though there was something erupting out of his stomach. Sometimes I can't control it. I think maybe I'm going to do something I can't take back. Something bad, like hit somebody. Worse, like kill somebody. Sometimes. When I get like that, I feel as if me, the bit of me that thinks about things and holds back from doing stupid stuff, as if that bit of me is pushed out of my head, like something else has just taken the controls. It's hard to get it back. The sound of his own voice, speaking for so long, felt strangely alien to him. He licked his lips, wishing he had some of Cal's water. He realised he hadn't looked up from his filthy trainers since he'd started talking. I think that's what it's like. The fury. You get so angry, so full of rage that you just lose yourself, only times a million. He swallowed noisily, realising that he was blushing again. Still that rage boiled in his throat. After a while, Cal spoke. Yeah, that makes sense. But it's not a chemical thing or an emotional one. It's the angels. People can't accept them because they're so... What's the word? Alien, said Brick. Yeah, I guess. They're so alien that they make people lose themselves. People just have to kill them, kill us. I can't think of any other reason. More silence, as deep as the ocean. Brick looked down the church and saw the hot dog stand from Fursville, burning, and beyond that the pavilion. He snapped his eyes open, realising that sleep had ambushed him. We should go, he said, wiping his eyes. When Cal didn't reply, he looked over his shoulder to see that he too had dropped off, his head resting on his knees. Cal, we can't fall asleep. It's okay, said the vicar. You can. You have my word. I won't move. I know what will happen. I couldn't bear to be like that again. Brick scowled at the man. He was a feral. He couldn't be trusted. But just for a second. Just to get your energy back. He closed his eyes and looked past the pavilion, saw the ocean there. There was a boat on it, a boat that became an island and then a house, and by the time Brick had swum to it, opened the door and walked inside, he no longer knew. He was dreaming. Whew! So, some interesting theories there about what the Fury is. And I'm sure we'll revisit them at some point. I better go because I've got to pick up the kids from school. Thank you for joining me for this. That's quite a long episode, that. We're back with Rilke at the beginning of the next chapter. She is still going for it. She's just like, it takes a lot, doesn't it? I've got superpowers. Let's destroy the world. We'll find out what she's up to in the next chapter. We're about a third of the way through this. Plenty left to come. Anyway, I hope you have a really wonderful day, whatever you're doing. And yeah, I will see you soon. See ya. Bye.